You've heard him 1,000 times. The saxophone at the beginning of Money. The long solo in Shine on You Crazy Diamond. The sound that runs through us and them like a river through stone. That was Dick Parry. He died on May 22, 2026, at the age of 83. David Gilmour announced it that morning. "My dear friend Dick Parry died this morning," he wrote. "Since I was 17, I have played in bands with Dick on saxophone, including Pink Floyd." 17. They met as teenagers. They played together for 60 years. In this video, I want to tell you about Dick Parry, who he was, how he ended up on the greatest rock album ever made, and what happened in between that almost meant he never played with Pink Floyd again. Dick Parry was born in Kentford, Suffolk, on December 22, 1942. He grew up in the east of England, flat, agricultural, cold, and found his way to music through the saxophone, which he took up as a teenager. In the early 1960s, he was playing in a Cambridge-based band called the Soul Committee. Cambridge in the early 1960s was a specific kind of place, a university town with a thriving music scene, full of young men who were too smart for the jobs available to them and too restless to do anything conventional. One of those young men was David Gilmour. He was playing in bands around Cambridge, learning guitar, absorbing everything he could hear, figuring out what kind of musician he wanted to be. Gilmour and Parry found each other the way musicians in small towns always do, through mutual friends, shared stages, the same circuit of pubs and clubs. They were teenagers. They had no idea what was coming. Gilmour would eventually join Pink Floyd in 1968, replacing Syd Barrett. By then, he and Parry had known each other for 5 years. When Gilmour needed a saxophonist for the sessions that would become The Dark Side of the Moon, he knew exactly who to call. The Dark Side of the Moon was recorded at Abbey Road Studios between 1972 and 1973. It was released on March 1st, 1973. It spent 741 weeks on the Billboard 200, a record that stood for decades. It has sold somewhere between 50 and 60 million copies. It is, by most measures, one of the best-selling albums in the history of recorded music. Dick Parry played on it. His saxophone appears on Money and Us and Them, two of the album's central tracks, two of the most recognizable moments on a record full of recognizable moments. The Money solo is 7 notes long at its core. It lasts about 40 seconds. It has been heard by hundreds of millions of people. It is arguably the most famous saxophone solo in rock music history. Dick Parry played it in a studio session at Abbey Road. He was 30 years old. He was a session musician, the person called in to add something specific that the band couldn't provide themselves. He played his part, packed up his saxophone, and went home. What does it feel like to play something that will be heard by 100 million people? To contribute something essential to a piece of music that will outlive everyone in the room? I doubt Parry knew at the time. Nobody in that studio knew what Dark Side of the Moon was going to become. They were making a record. He was doing his job. 2 years later, he did it again. Wish You Were Here, released in 1975, contains some of Parry's most beautiful playing. The saxophone lines that run through Shine on You Crazy Diamond, like something searching for something it can't quite name. After the tours of the mid-1970s, Dick Parry's connection to Pink Floyd went quiet. The band moved in directions that didn't require his saxophone. Roger Waters and David Gilmour were pulling the band in different ways. The World of the Wall, released in 1979, was a different world from Dark Side of the Moon. Parry kept working, session musician work, touring with other bands, Rory Gallagher, John Entwistle from The Who, Lightnin' Slim. The life of a musician who is very good at what he does and not famous for doing it. And then, at some point in the 1980s, he stopped. He sold his saxophones. He left music. He moved to a village near Cambridge and became a farrier, someone who shoes horses. It is an ancient trade that requires skill and patience and the ability to work with large animals that don't always cooperate. The man who played the saxophone solo on Money was shoeing horses in a village in Suffolk. Nobody came looking for him. Nobody was going to. And then, at Christmas 1993, David Gilmour received a Christmas card from Dick Parry. Gilmour later described the moment in a 1994 interview. He had been preparing for The Division Bell, Pink Floyd's first album since Waters' departure, and he got a Christmas card from someone he hadn't seen or spoken to in years. From Dick Parry, Gilmour called him. Parry came back. He played on Wearing the Inside Out, one of the Division Bell's standout tracks. He went on the 1994 World Tour. He was at Live 8 in 2005 when Pink Floyd reunited for the first and only time after Waters' return. He played with Gilmour's solo band on the On an Island tour in 2006, the last band Gilmour had that included Rick Wright, the Pink Floyd keyboardist who died in 2008. A Christmas card. That's all it was. The man who had sold his saxophones and gone to shoe horses sent a Christmas card, and the man who received it picked up the phone. How many things in music history, in any history, came down to something as small as a Christmas card sent on a whim? Dick Parry died on May 22, 2026. He was 83 years old. He played on one of the 50 best-selling albums in the history of recorded music. He played a saxophone solo that has been heard by hundreds of millions of people. He quit. He shod horses. He sent a Christmas card. He came back. If this story meant something to you, and I think it did, the like button is right there. And subscribe, because we're going to keep telling these stories for as long as there are people who want to hear them. Rest in peace, Dick Parry. You were heard, even when you didn't know it.